The camera slowly glides across a luxurious rooftop restaurant in New York, glittering city lights stretching endlessly beneath the night sky. Soft piano music plays in the background. Laughter, clinking glasses, and murmurs of wealth fill the air. At the center table sits Richard Kane, a 46-year-old billionaire, CEO of a global tech empire. His tailored Armani suit and expensive watch scream power and success. People glance at him in admiration. But tonight, something feels different. Richard stares at his untouched plate, his mind miles away. There's a storm behind his sharp blue eyes, a man carrying secrets, regrets, and a pain no amount of wealth can erase. The waiter approaches with the bill. Richard pulls out his black titanium Centurion card, the one symbol of limitless wealth. The waiter swipes it, pauses, tries again. And then softly says the unthinkable. "Sir, your card has been declined." A ripple of whispers spreads through the restaurant. Expensive-dressed strangers stare. Some smirk. Some pull out their phones. Richard's throat tightens. For the first time in decades, he feels small. He checks his phone. A text notification pops up. "Your accounts have been frozen. Contact the bank immediately." A chill runs down his spine. He excuses himself, pretending it's just a technical glitch, but deep down, he knows, this isn't a mistake. Something is terribly wrong. Outside the restaurant, Richard walks into the cold New York night, clutching his phone, trying to call his financial advisor. And that's when he sees her. A tiny girl, maybe 8 years old, sitting on the pavement with a torn blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Her cheeks are pale, her lips chapped, and her trembling hands hold a small paper cup. She whispers softly, almost to herself. "Please, just a little food." For a moment, Richard wants to ignore her, he's drowning in his own chaos. But something about her eyes stops him. They're the same hazel shade as his daughter's. The daughter he hasn't seen in 3 years. Richard hesitates, kneels down, and asks gently. "Hey, where's your mom, sweetheart?" The girl shakes her head slowly. Her voice cracks as she whispers. She went to heaven last winter." Richard freezes. His heart aches in a way he hasn't felt in years. He looks around. It's freezing. People walk past her like she's invisible. And that's when something inside him shifts. Richard pats his pockets, realizing he has no cash. He sighs and says softly. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I can't." But before he can finish, the little girl does something that shocks him to his core. She reaches into her torn jacket pocket, pulls out 2 crumpled dollar bills, and holds them out to him. "Mister, you look hungry. You can have this." Richard just stares. His breath catches in his throat. His vision blurs with tears. This girl, who has nothing, is offering everything she has. To him, a man who once had everything. For the first time in his adult life, Richard feels his walls crumble. As Richard walks the girl to a nearby diner, he learns her name is Lila. She used to live in a small apartment with her mother, who worked 2 jobs to keep them fed. But when her mom passed away from pneumonia, Lila had nowhere to go. The system failed her. No foster homes. No relatives. Just, the streets. Richard listens in silence, guilt eating him alive. Because once upon a time, he was Lila. 38 years ago, a 10-year-old Richard had stood on a street corner with his mother, begging for food after his father abandoned them. But he'd buried that memory deep beneath layers of money, power, and ego. And tonight, fate forced him to face it again. Inside the diner, Richard orders the warmest meal on the menu for Lila. She eats slowly, savoring each bite, smiling through exhaustion. And then, Richard makes a decision that will change both their lives forever. He calls his private attorney, his financial advisor, and his assistant. For the first time in years, his voice is firm, but gentle. Find out why my accounts are frozen. And tomorrow. I want full custody of a little girl named Lila. The next morning, Richard discovers the truth. His accounts weren't hacked. His company didn't collapse. It was his estranged brother, Mark, who had secretly moved billions out of their joint assets as revenge for a betrayal from 20 years ago. Richard feels rage, but then remembers Lila's tiny trembling hands offering him those 2 crumpled dollars. And in that moment, he lets go of the war. Because life isn't about winning. It's about giving. Weeks later, Richard finalizes Lila's guardianship. She moves into his penthouse overlooking Central Park. But unlike his old life of endless business calls, Richard does something different this time. He wakes up early to make her breakfast. He walks her to school, holding her hand. He tucks her in at night and whispers. "You're safe now, Lila. Always." The world sees a billionaire's comeback story. But Richard knows, this isn't about him anymore. It's about a little girl, who reminded him what it means to be human. Months later, at the same rooftop restaurant where his card was declined, Richard holds Lila's hand as they dine together. This time, when the bill arrives, he slides a new card across the table. The waiter hesitates, nervous from the last time. But the card clears instantly. Richard smiles softly, then places 2 crumpled dollar bills next to the receipt, framed, protected. Lila looks up, confused. "Lila, why'd you keep them?" Richard, smiling through tears, "Because, sweetheart, those $2 are worth more than every billion I've ever made." Fade out. Soft piano music plays. The screen fades to black with one line on the screen. "Sometimes, the richest hearts, live in the poorest souls." Red heart. It was past 2 a.m. The room was quiet. The city lights outside shimmered like distant stars. Richard Kane sat by the window, holding a small glass frame in his trembling hands. Inside it, were 2 crumpled dollar bills, the same ones an 8-year-old little girl had once offered him. The same night when the world laughed at him. The night when his billionaire credit card got declined. And when a poor little girl, with nothing left in the world, gave him everything she had. Tears slowly rolled down his cheeks, his heart heavier than it had ever been. For years, Richard had thought he understood life. He believed success meant money, power, and status. But that night, standing outside that restaurant, shivering in the cold, watching a hungry little girl offer her last $2 to a man who once owned billions. He realized, he had been wrong his entire life. We grow up believing that bigger houses, fancier cars, and thicker wallets define success. We think happiness comes from how much we own. But life has a strange way of humbling us. One day, all the numbers in your bank account, all the gold, all the power, it can disappear in a second. And when it does, you're left asking yourself one question. Who do I have, when I have nothing? That poor little girl had no roof, no family, and barely any food. And yet, she had something Richard didn't. A heart rich with kindness. Because true wealth isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in how much love you give. How many lives you touch. And how deeply your heart can feel someone else's pain. When that little girl offered her last $2, she didn't just feed Richard's empty stomach. She fed his empty soul. That one small gesture, so pure, so selfless, was the spark that lit a fire inside him. From that night on, Richard changed. He stopped measuring his worth by his wealth. He stopped seeing people as numbers. And he started seeing them as stories. He gave Lila a home, a warm bed, and a future. But in truth, she saved him first. Sometimes, we think we're helping someone. But in reality, they are saving us from the emptiness inside. We don't understand why bad things happen. Why we lose people we love. Why we face failures. Why the ground beneath us suddenly collapses. But every breakdown is a breakthrough in disguise. That night, Richard lost his wealth, his ego, and his false sense of control. But he found his soul again. And maybe, just maybe, life sometimes has to break us before it can remake us into who we were always meant to be.